Rick and Morty presents Pickle Rick. We start out seeing Morty comb his hair while wearing something different for once, finally. He asks Rick if this is a joke because he sounds weird, and asks if he's in the toilet or inside him. It made me giggle that he put his hand on his chest and had that expression. Rick talks to him from behind a door, and Morty asks if he sent him a message from another universe to bring him a Tums again. That made me giggle too. I guess Tums is a snack. Then Rick tells Morty proudly that he was smart enough to turn himself into a pickle. Morty doesn't care because he's used to Rick, and that was useless. And when he says that pickles are vegetables, Rick says that pickles are made of cucumbers, and cucumbers are fruit, which you can tell because they contain seeds. If vegetables didn't have any seeds, how would people be able to grow them? You plant vegetable seeds in Harvest Moon. So I don't think he explained it very well. Then he naturally says, "Don't you dare eat a pickle while talking to me." And Beth goes up to Morty asking where Rick is because it's time for therapy. That's disappointing. That already happened in the show. Well, at least this will give me an excuse to kind of review the episode of the show. Not literally, because it's not the same exact story, thankfully. Morty immediately says with no expression at all that Rick did this to himself to avoid family counseling. Again, I don't even understand why Rick thought this would work. Because logically, Beth should have just picked him up and carried him to the therapist's office anyways. Plus, it would prove that she wasn't crazy or lying about how Rick is. Rick crafts an elaborate lie that he built a fruit gun so that a gun will turn gun nuts into bananas. And Morty has way too much faith in him. And then Morty figures out that the syringe is rigged to squirt all over him in 7 minutes when they'll already be at therapy. This whole thing bored me and I kinda had to force myself to read the dialogue because I've already seen this exact same plot in the show. And that's why being derivative sucks. Sonic has the same problem where its comics are too much like the games. I'm glad there's different dialogue here, but dialogue is a hard time making up for lack of creativity, no matter how good the franchise is. But it is helping. That's why I never complained about the stories that were based off the show much more, because it's still an interesting and entertaining story, not a boring one. Rick lies that the syringe is the cure for cancer, and Beth takes it. And, again, just like in the show, why are they leaving Rick alone instead of bringing him to therapy, which he clearly wanted to avoid? What are they thinking? They're kind of giving him what he wants. His plan worked. Also, anyone would question why they left the window open. So of course something threatens him. So Woodpecker gets called a trumped up dinosaur with a headbanging addiction and bad hair. And then it picks up Rick and flies away with him. I'm just wondering why it doesn't eat him immediately instead of flying away with him. Because it's so slippery in the bird's beak, he drops him. And Rick is unlucky enough to get dropped down a sewer hole, when it'd be more likely to have been dropped somewhere else. Also, I wonder if it makes sense that he even survived falling that far instead of the pickle being clearly damaged. Instead, it's invincible. I can only assume that Rick made himself into a ghost, or separated his soul from his body, so he can possess whatever he wants with his consciousness. And that's why he's living despite having no internal organs, like a brain. Because when a ghost is possessing, say, a keyboard or something, it wouldn't matter to them that they don't have a brain in it. A bug goes over to him, and he says that he's going to poke his tongue in its mind and use it to build a super suit out of roaches and rat bones. That's gruesome, and never made any sense to me. That's one of the reasons I didn't like the episode. Because he isn't using his tongue on his mind here, lying down on it, and is instead standing up, there's still no explanation for how he's moving the limbs he attached to himself. Because he's not still on the bug he killed with his teeth, which you'd think would have simply killed him with his much greater range of movement. I guess he made sure that when he got turned into a pickle, the tongue would be able to send sparks of electricity out, just in case he needs to do that. So it's not literally exactly like a pickle. But if he thought that far ahead, again, why didn't he make the pickle capable of telekinesis just in case then? How would the sparks of electricity be seen as necessary if he only turned himself into a pickle for a few minutes to avoid therapy? We should have been told he's just possessing the pickle like a ghost, and so his soul limbs can operate any limbs he makes. Otherwise, I'd have to wonder how a pickle with no nervous system can move these limbs. This makes no sense, and is easily the least logical plot in the series. He says that got dark because that baby turtle's gonna wear on his conscience, and thinks that only a monster would flush that cute little guy. Then it turns out he made a jetpack too, you know, with no materials and tools. Totally believable. And if he really cared about the baby turtle, he would go find it again later and clone it. He gets out of the toilet, but then it cuts away from him to show the family at therapy. At least that'll make actual sense. Summer and Morty don't trust the new therapist, and Beth says that he was the first one on Craigslist who answered the phone, and she's desperate. And it's forced that the principal just assumes they're going to therapy for the exact same reason as him. It's not like he has a family. This is a family therapist. Anyways, finally they go into the therapist's office, and Morty's in trouble for a problem that's so common for boys his age that he shouldn't really be in here. And Summer has been writing letters to convicts. Well, she was idealistic enough to appreciate working for Satan in the show. It makes sense that the therapist guesses that Beth has daddy issues because her father couldn't even show up. Morty's literal-minded after the therapist says that it sounds like a book deal. Yeah, therapists can totally violate the rule of patient confidentiality like that. I guess he would get away with it if he changed all of the names. Maybe she's fine with losing her job to write a book. Beth says that Morty knocked a potted plant off his history teacher's desk by accident, and the therapist has arbitrarily assumed something stupid about Beth because of the way a pickle is shaped. I guess she assumed Beth was lying and got suspicious because of what a pickle looks like, but this is a problem she wouldn't have had if she brought Rick with her. I can't blame Beth for wanting to get the therapist focused on her kids, but it's still mean. Summer says that at least her prisoner pen pal listens to her, proving that she just wants someone to listen to her for a change, and that's her family's fault. They're making her lonely. This is interesting to me because I like psychology, but it took until now to get not boring, because now the writer's showing creativity by introducing new things. And it's always good writing to develop on the main characters, making them more human. It's sad that I even have to say this because it's so obvious. I'd rather a main character, who I have to see all the time, be developed on than be someone I see as uninteresting and one-dimensional, which is just annoying. The therapist has to point out the obvious to Beth, that the traumas parents inflict on their kids can echo down to their own children. And she asks what the real reason is for why Rick isn't here today. Beth's too stubborn and defensive though, and just says that she's sure there's a very good reason for why it's Pickle instead of being honest with her. Like, does she want progress or not? Rick complains about being in a corporate wasteland. It really looked like he just emerged from the toilet in his own house. And that would have made sense, because it didn't look like the bird got to carry him far at all before it dropped him into the sewers. Instead, he's all the way here just to have a story about this. So we see the dogs and mechas from an episode of the show enslaving a guy who wants to see his daughter again. Obviously, this has to take place in another dimension, because nobody's talking as if Rick turned himself into a pickle before. Reading out the script, I don't remember these things coming back at all, and that's the whole story. Maybe it's just not memorable because taking something from an episode of the show that doesn't belong in this story, that's a reference to a completely different episode. They could have very easily had it be more creative, but at the same time, at least they're fully utilizing this concept instead of it just being one episode. The humans told that their leader is watching them through the camera, as I wonder how the robo-dogs are back. Rick says that this is further proof that Jerry should be denied anything he desires. That's not quite enough to explain this. The dogs with intelligence mechas all went to their own planet. They decided to leave Earth alone for a good reason. It makes sense if their good leader died. Also, Rick went to another planet's beach on the suggestion of Jerry, but he probably thinks that's much more the exception. Then one of the dogs smells Rick and wants to chase and eat him. And do worse than that. And his dialogue has Rick snark that dogs would sound like psychopaths if they could talk. Why in the world is Rick revealing himself to the dogs and pretending to be a normal guy? He doesn't look like one anyways. If he built a ray gun, why didn't he just fire it at them right away? Also, how could he power the ray gun when he doesn't have access to super powerful lab materials? Then we see that Morty's dog is back as their leader. So why did he return to Earth and start enslaving? Why did Rick repeat the same mistake as in the show? The therapist immediately understands Morty and gives him some compassionate advice to just look away from girls and think about politics. And tells Summer that she prefers unavailable men, that her parents would hate. She tells her that that's not unusual, probably because tons of other people are like that too. She then figures out Beth perfectly, accusing her of loving unavailable men, thanks to Rick, and hating available ones, like Jerry. So of course she missed him because he wasn't there when she divorced him. So it triggered her feelings of abandonment all over again. She then acts unprofessional by insulting Beth as not nearly as smart as Rick, saying that she's like a toddler with a crayon. No therapist would do this. Beth insults her and complains that this isn't about her, it's about fixing her kids. Summer's problem is just totally invented for the sake of the plot, just like in the show. But at least it makes sense. But it's hard to take a compressed vice seriously. I can tell because I take Morty's problem more seriously since it is in character for him. At least in the show, Summer was said to like getting high off jar fumes in class, and she actually does get high again with Morty in a later episode, so it technically comes back, just not in the same method as before. The therapist asks Beth how she feels. Actually, this is my favorite part of the story, probably because it's not as forced and confusing as the Rick part. I probably sound bored, but at least it's not contrived. Beth says that she's annoyed with the therapist and says she's the one obsessed with Pickles here, and reveals that Jerry is her ex-husband in this story. Oh, nowhere. Alternate universe. See, this is why the original comic Morty died for nothing. The therapist reassures Beth that, of course, they're here to support her, not attack her. And she tells the children that she should reinforce family ties by hugging Beth and saying they love her. Naturally, they're too scared of her right now. And Summer says that she's like the possum that eats their garbage and beats up the cat. They don't have a cat. It confused me at first that she said that because she doesn't look anything like a possum. Beth then looks over at what the therapist has been writing down, and somehow she doesn't know that she has abandonment issues. Either that or is lying to cover for her own flaw. The rest of it is ridiculous, though. An entire page is wasted, and then Rick tells the dog leader that he's got the human held hostage. I guess he wants to lure the threats to him so he can get rid of them here. But you think he'd just leave the building? Say, not my problem. But they did try to take over the entire world. Or at least want to. Last time. So of course he would try to do something. The dog explains that they didn't take his daughter. They hired her as the assistant for their startup. With her help, they plan to crumble the dog biscuit industry. Wait, by making more dog biscuits? Or literally get rid of dog biscuits entirely, which would be dumb of them. It'd be inconsiderate. I guess they want to make the best dog biscuits possible. And of course they would know what the best dog biscuits are, because they are dogs. So they crumble it by outcompeting it. Why would dogs literally want to crumble the dog biscuit industry? Can't they make dog biscuits themselves on their planet? Them wanting to take over the world again would actually make more sense than this. Or at least a city. Much like Summer, his daughter doesn't want to lose her first job because of her dad, and Rick's told that she's making 70% of what a man does and would get no benefits, only exposure and experience. Rick calls them monsters for it, showing morality. I'm just wondering how such obvious gender wage discrimination is legal. I thought this kind of thing wasn't real anymore, and the gender disparity was just that women tend to work jobs in general that pay less than men's jobs. Like they don't usually work in construction working or STEM jobs. Like if it was on an individual basis that they were paid less, that sounds like it'd be illegal, like a lawsuit waiting to happen. I guess this is intentionally outdated to really emphasize how bad her working conditions are. But that doesn't mean it makes sense. Like why would the dogs be worse? I giggle at the humans saying that pit bulls are noble and misunderstood. so they should be like half chihuahua when the doorbell rings. That's true. He's shocked by his collar and told to go back into his crate until 5 p.m. The dogs really want revenge with their hyperintelligence. Then I'm immediately confused because Rick shoots the prisoner for no reason at all. Finally, that confusing pad-out boredom's over. Beth finally says that she feels angry that they're still talking about her when Summer has a hand-carved shiv in her push-up bra. Summer's known for being a badass in the show, like she worked with the Deathstalkers at some point. So this is in character, although obviously it'd make more sense for her to have pepper spray, which wouldn't get her kicked out of school. She develops on her character some more instead of just being a stereotypical teenage girl, saying that she hates it every time she tries to be creative and gets shut down. Huh? Well, she did get insulted for having a toothpick in her mouth because she was that desperate for a thing. But that's not creative. She talked like other people did it too, and she was just following a fad. But I guess her point was she was trying to stand out. Since when does she ever try to be creative? Was that the do something with turquoise thing? I guess she means coming up with new ideas. She complains that she wasn't complimented for a shiv, and finally points out that Morty's not the first guy in high school to have this problem, and focusing on it is just gonna make him even weirder. Yeah, because he'll think that he's a creep and try to accept it to feel better. Although I guess he is kind of a pervert. It is sweet of her to defend Morty. And she hopes that her mother will stop pretending she's happy and healthy and get help. Morty says what you'd expect of him. And after a silence, it's sweet that the therapist says, "I have patients who would literally kill for your problem." It's so sweet of her to reassure them so easily. She's actually being a better mother than Beth right now. It's sweet of Beth to say that she's angry at her father doing this because she knows he needs therapy more than her or any of them, and is furious that she thought of as too stupid to notice. It's obvious Rick would never play along in therapy though and just be rebellious and defensive because he's so embarrassed. It should be obvious that trying to get him into group therapy wouldn't work because he thinks he has to save face in front of the people he sees every day. If he's even a little smart, he already knows everything that's wrong with them. Of course, you think therapy is a waste of time. He's a nihilist. And while I'm sure he could make an invention to fix his problem, doing that would mean changing his personality. He'd think of that as brainwashing, so of course he wouldn't do that because he accepts himself for who he is. She was really desperate to think Rick would ever even get help by group therapy, let alone go to it. He'd just be complaining the whole time and bring down the mood. Like he would just insult her profession over and over again. Her crying makes me feel really sorry for her. She says she's embarrassed by her kids' problems and scared that she will follow in her footsteps. And she's anxious to lure the syringe over her father as he lays there on the counter helpless for once. Even the character in the story had a more logical assumption of how the plot went than the writer did. It's always distracting when this happens because it shows that the writer actually thought of how the plot could have gone a logical way and didn't write it anyways. She hopes that there is some limit to his genius, as Summer and Morty feel sorry for her, proving that they love her. How could anyone hate this? This makes me care about the characters more because it develops on them, makes me feel sorry for them. They feel like a real family. A real dysfunctional family, but still. I think that the show developing on its characters is part of what made it fantastic to me instead of just another good show. The characters could easily have not been cared about by the writers this much, but they were, and it's what made me more invested in them. So Beth isn't just the angry wife here. Summer isn't just the valley girl annoying me. And Morty isn't just an annoying wuss who gets mad at Rick sometimes. The writers cared enough to think about these characters more and actually add to them. And deconstruct them. I take this over lazy writing. Although the therapy sessions are kind of boring and tedious, but I've been through a hell of a lot worse when it comes to boring and tedious. Rick frees the human from the shock collar by effortlessly turning him into a banana, without access to the tools and materials of his lab. No logic at all. Can you tell why I prefer the therapy sessions? There's a reason most stuff is made out of the materials that it is. It's amusing that he snarks, "If I had hands I would clap, but slowly and sarcastically. And if I had legs I would climb up there and kill you." He's not even freaking out. He offers to give him limbs and weapons so he can rescue his daughter. I guess his fruit gun, a check of his gun from his lie earlier is making him a ghost who possesses, so that even he can move anything around that looks like limbs, because his brain's sending signals to move limbs. And somehow the signals can activate the limbs when they aren't even organic. So it has to be because of magical ghost possession, because there's no nerves in the bananas. I have to try to make sense of this story because that's what I do. It's more interesting than just talking about the plot when you can read. So I hate stories that make figuring them out impossible. I'd rather have a plot that I can accept. The father complains that his daughter has to park far away and has the worst lunchtime when she was the top of her class. And this is her first time away from home. As they go down from an air vent, Rick tells her to let her live her life, or she's gonna live a stunted life with no agency. The father is exaggerating when he says that Rick is advocating neglect. No, she's an adult. Not like Kid Beth. So how would he figure Rick out just from the standard advice he probably heard all the time? Rick tells him that he's only doing this plan so he won't kill any innocent dogs. That's sweet. But he was smirking when he fired a laser at the last ones. So, I guess he was hiding his horrible inner turmoil. Because now he is opposed to attacking dogs. So this is going to be a consistent character trait. Because it comes up again later. So he wants to distract Snowball while he gets his daughter. Why is Rick standing there doing nothing while the dog talks instead of immediately firing the ray gun to destroy the mecha? Like shooting its weapons pointed at him. At least it shoots the mecha in the next panel, removing the dog's intelligence. And aw, it's sweet that he gives him a belly rub. He didn't have to do that. It turns out Rick was smart enough to make his weapons not work because he really did care about the dogs. So he turned them back to normal too. So Jaguar tells his daughter to be home before dark and tells her not to bring home those dogs for some selfish reason. I guess he still has a grudge against him even at this point. I'm glad we got to see him actually interact with his daughter in this universe. And it's interesting that she has a unibrow. And I think it kind of works with the way she looks in general. She's still pretty enough. She has long hair. Then Rick shows up, and aw, he was sweet enough to give Morty his dog back. But he's never gonna show up again, so I guess he got sent back to the dog mecha planet anyways. He reassures him that he's just lonely because high school is a boring hell that makes everyone aware of their flaws, and also because women. And it's so in character that he tries to sound reluctant to offset how he's being unusually nice to him. Like, here's your fucking dog. Then he's honest again. I love this ending a lot more than the show's episode. He tells Beth, "Beth, I love you, but I hate therapy, okay? Summer, you just want male attention, so here I am. Let's, I don't know, go back to that planet where they liked her dumb shirt." Then he tells the therapist to go focus on Jaguar, who was working with him earlier, because apparently he was smart enough to bring him here as a Chekhov's gunman. Good. Gee, good thing he agreed to come here with them instead of wanting to kill him for disappointing him. It's certainly more convenient that he's like this here, but it's way better because it's not nearly as depressing, and it makes sense that he'd end up feeling guilty after what he did. Because the fact that he had to go through everything he did after turning himself into a pickle, maybe he saw that as something he deserved, so it caused him to feel guilty and want to make it up to them. Beth complains instead of complimenting Rick for this. She says that she should break this syringe, and he has no idea how hard her day's been. Good, it's pointed out how Rick looks. And then he satisfyingly shoots her with a fruit gun, saying, "Now you can see how hard my day's been. All of you. Genius isn't easy." This is such a better ending. This is like if they rewrote the episode to have a better ending, because the writer was slightly better than that one. I want more like this. Oh, come on, what are the chances that Mr. P's showing up here? He doesn't have any problems. He tells him he's not the problem here, and lectures him to think about who they become and the hurt they cause, and the shells they develop. Then the story ends with them randomly advertising something, and we see Morty and Rick on the couch watching this with fruits for heads. Rick complains that he can't believe this was all one long commercial. I'm gonna pretend this isn't even canon, and is instead showing off a different parallel universe entirely from the previous pages. Because this threatens to ruin the awesome ending. I'm not gonna think that the whole story is not canon just because of this. Maybe they're just watching this parallel universe from interdimensional cable. That doesn't mean it's not true, it just means someone's spying on these two. This story consists of two different plots. The therapy sessions were easily my favorite part, Beth aside, because they were developing on the main characters, making me care about them more, and impressing me with how the writer was creative enough to think up their problems, and smart enough to have the therapist point them out. And she was nice to the kids. Beth was annoying the whole story though, but at least the therapy was simple and made sense as a story. Nothing about the Pickle Rick story works. The story in general is inspired by the Pickle Rick episode, and is way too faithful to it. I'm thankful for any originality it had. Why get excited by the same basic thing? It's just Pickle Rick going through an office building again instead of simply heading home. You'd expect him to be back home when he went through that toilet. At least this time it's a smart dogs and mechas instead of innocent people. But their plan is too vague. And it's completely forgettable. And I remember this is a Pickle Rick story. So it's not very memorable that these things from another episode show up. At least we get to see how Jaguar treats his daughter. And the ending is awesome. With Rick finally being honest with his family and trying to cheer his grandchildren up. Aww. And I loved that he was nice to the dogs and spared them and didn't like having to kill a baby turtle. And he turned them into fruit at the end, so it's not like he was actually written out of character. But the problem is that the entire premise of the story is frustratingly forced. It's never explained how the hell he can move as a pickle. Pickles don't have nervous systems. And sure, he'd have his brain in the pickle. I guess it was shrunk to fit in it. So I guess he did have a human nervous system in there. At which point it's not really a pickle, just a pickle with a nervous system. But how'd he modify those limbs so they'd let the nerve signals travel through them properly? The whole time he had no tools or proper materials because he didn't have access to his lab. How could he operate a mecha made of animal parts without his mouth full of like something that could let him operate it? And without always having a hat over his head. Like, the dog mecha was more realistic than what he's having. Like, it's not like he always had a hat over his head that was transmitting his thoughts so that the arms and legs would move. Because he doesn't always have the hat on. And obviously, Beth would have just brought him to the therapist's office anyways, Pickle or not. And Rick had no reason to think she wouldn't. So why did he even try this? How did he get away with this? She told the therapist that he turned himself into a pickle anyways, so no wonder I always thought that it would have worked fine if he did just turn himself into a pickle to prove he could. That'd be simpler and make more sense. I'm pretty sure the whole reason that he turned himself into a pickle instead of just warping to another dimension was that he was trying to come up with a lie as to why he couldn't go to therapy. If they just couldn't find him, they would know that he was trying to skip therapy. He didn't even try to hide the syringe. Not to mention, it's not really much of a pickle if he can still talk and has eyes. If he really turned himself into a pickle, then he wouldn't have eyes and mouth anymore.